They say money can buy anything: power, silence, even justice. But on a rainy Tuesday night at Le Ciel, the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, $1 billion couldn't buy the one thing Alexander Sterling desperately needed: peace. His 2-year-old son was screaming, a sound that shattered the crystal glasses and the patience of the city's elite. Security was closing in, the manager was trembling, and Alexander, the man who controlled half the shipping industry, looked completely defeated. No one dared to help. No one, except a waitress named Sarah who had nothing to lose. She broke every rule of high society with 5 simple words that changed everything. He just needs a mum. But she had no idea that calming the baby was the easy part. The real danger was the father. The sound was piercing, a jagged shriek that cut through the low hum of polite conversation and the clinking of silver cutlery. Inside Le Ciel, a restaurant where a reservation required a 6-month wait and a background check, chaos was erupting at table 4. Sarah Miller adjusted her apron, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. She had been on her feet for 10 hours. Her rent was 3 months late, and her landlord, Mr. Henderson, had threatened to change the locks by Friday. She didn't have time for drama. She just needed her tips. "Do not look at them," hissed Pierre, the floor manager, grabbing Sarah's arm as she passed the kitchen doors. His face was pale, beads of sweat gathering on his upper lip. "That is Alexander Sterling. If he is unhappy, he buys the building and fires us all. Stay away." Sarah glanced over. Alexander Sterling, even she knew the name. He was 32, the heir to Sterling Industries, and featured on the cover of Forbes more often than movie stars appeared in Vogue. He was devastatingly handsome, sharp jawline, ice blue eyes, and a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Sarah made in a year. But right now, he didn't look like a titan of industry. He looked like a man drowning. In the high chair beside him, a toddler was thrashing wildly. His face was crimson, tears streaming down his cheeks, his little fists pounding against the expensive mahogany table. A bowl of lobster bisque had already been overturned, dripping onto the pristine white tablecloth like a wound. "Leo, please," Alexander whispered, his voice strained. He looked around, seeing the glare of the other patrons. A senator was shaking his head in disgust 2 tables away. A famous actress rolled her eyes and signaled for her check. "Leo, stop it! Here, take the tablet, take the toy." The boy, Leo, slapped the tablet away. It skidded across the floor. I want... The boy choked on his own sobs, unable to articulate the grief that seemed too big for his tiny body. "Sir," Pierre approached the table, his voice trembling. Perhaps it would be best if we packed your meal to go. The other guests are..." Alexander stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His eyes were cold, dangerous. "Are you asking me to leave?" No, Monsieur Sterling, just the noise." "I'm trying," Alexander snapped, his composure cracking. "He hasn't slept in 2 days. I don't know what he wants." The restaurant went silent. The vulnerability of the billionaire was shocking. Sarah felt a pull in her chest. It was a familiar ache. She recognized that cry. It wasn't a tantrum about a toy. It was the cry of abandonment. It was the sound of a child looking for a heartbeat that wasn't there. Without thinking, ignoring Pierre's frantic hand signals, Sarah walked toward table 4. "Sarah!" "No," Pierre whispered harshly. She didn't stop. She walked right up to the edge of the disaster zone. Alexander turned to her, his eyes defensive, expecting another complaint. "Get the check," Alexander spat out. "We're leaving." "He's not hungry," Sarah said softly. Her voice was calm, contrasting with the hysteria in the room. Alexander blinked. "Excuse me?" Sarah looked down at little Leo. The boy was gasping for air, his eyes squeezed shut. She knelt down, ruining her uniform on the floor, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "He's not hungry, and he doesn't want the tablet," Sarah said, looking up at the billionaire. "He's smelling your cologne, sir. It's strong. Musk and cedar." "What does that have to do with anything?" Alexander demanded, flustered. "It masks the scent he's looking for," Sarah said. She reached out a hand, not touching the boy, just hovering near him. "He's overtired, scared, and surrounded by strangers. He just needs a mum." Alexander froze. The air left his lungs. "His mother isn't here." "I know," Sarah said gently. "But he needs that energy. May I?" It was a breach of protocol, so severe it was a fireable offense. You do not touch the VIPs. You definitely do not touch their children. Alexander hesitated, then gave a curt, desperate nod. Sarah didn't pick him up immediately. She started humming. It was a low, vibration-heavy sound, a simple melody her own grandmother used to hum. Lavender's blue, dilly, dilly. Leo's screams hitched. He opened his tear-filled eyes. He saw Sarah. She wasn't wearing a stiff suit. She smelled like vanilla and dish soap. Warm, domestic smells. "Hi there, little bear," she whispered. "It's too loud in here, isn't it?" Leo hiccuped. Sarah slowly unclipped the tray of the high chair. She lifted the boy into her arms. He was heavy, tense, fighting against the comfort at first. But Sarah didn't let go. She held him firmly against her chest, placing his head in the crook of her neck, rocking her body in a rhythmic sway that was instinctual. "It's okay," she murmured into the boy's soft hair. "You're safe. I've got you." The transformation was instant. The thrashing stopped. Leo's little hands bunched into the fabric of her cheap waitress uniform. He let out a long, shuddering breath and collapsed against her, his exhaustion finally taking over. The restaurant was dead silent. The senator was staring. The actress had lowered her phone. Alexander Sterling stood frozen, his hands hovering uselessly at his sides. He had hired 3 nannies in the last month, the best agencies in London and New York. Leo had screamed at all of them until they quit. Yet here was a waitress, with a ketchup stain on her apron, holding his son as if he were her own. For 2 minutes, Sarah just stood there, rocking him. Leo's breathing evened out. He was asleep. She turned to Alexander, speaking in a hush. "He's out, sir. You should take him home straight to bed. Don't change him into pajamas. It'll wake him. Just let him sleep." She carefully transferred the sleeping toddler into Alexander's awkward arms. Their fingers brushed, his rough and cold, hers warm and calloused. An electric shock seemed to pass between them, startling Alexander. He looked at his son, then at her. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "How did you do that?" he whispered. "My little sister," Sarah lied, a shadow passing over her face. "She used to cry like that." Alexander struggled for words. The arrogant billionaire was gone. "Thank you. What is your name?" "Sarah, sir." "Sarah." He said the name as if tasting it. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a black American Express card, and dropped it on the table. "Pierre!" he barked, his authority returning instantly. "Add $5,000 to the tip. For her. Personally." Pierre scurried over, bowing. "Of course, Monsieur Sterling. Immediately." Sarah's eyes widened. $5,000. That was her rent for 6 months. It was freedom. "Thank you, sir," she stammered. Alexander looked at her one last time, his gaze lingering on her eyes. "You have a gift, Sarah. Don't waste it here." He turned and walked out, his sleeping son safe in his arms, the entire restaurant watching him go. Sarah felt dizzy with relief. She turned to go back to the kitchen, a smile forming on her face. "Sarah!" Pierre's voice was like a whip crack. She turned. He wasn't smiling. He was furious. "You disobeyed a direct order," Pierre hissed, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "You embarrassed this establishment. You touched a guest. You made a scene. I helped him. He gave me a tip." "The tip goes to the house pool," Pierre sneered, snatching the receipt. "And you? You are finished. Get your things. You're fired." 3 days later, Sarah was sitting on the curb outside her apartment building on 4th Street. It was raining. Her few belongings were packed into 2 trash bags next to her. Mr. Henderson hadn't waited until Friday. He had changed the locks that morning. She had no job, no home, and $12 in her pocket. The $5,000 tip Pierre had stolen kept playing in her mind like a cruel joke. She had tried to fight him, but who would believe a waitress over the manager of Le Ciel? She shivered, pulling her thin coat tighter. "Okay, Sarah," she whispered to herself. "Think. Shelter on 32nd, or maybe the subway station." A pair of headlights blinded her. A sleek, black Maybach rolled silently to the curb, splashing a puddle of water near her feet. Sarah didn't move. She just stared at the tires. The back door opened. An umbrella popped out, held by a large man in a suit. Then a second figure emerged. It was Alexander Sterling. He looked different. Dark circles under his eyes, his tie loosened. He looked around the gritty street with distaste before his eyes landed on Sarah sitting on the wet concrete. "Sarah." She looked up, squinting against the rain. She tried to stand, but her legs were numb. "Mr. Sterling?" He frowned, looking at the trash bags. "What are you doing here?" "I live here," she said, her voice cracking. "Well, I used to, until about an hour ago." "Why aren't you at work?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "I was fired about 10 seconds after you left the restaurant." Alexander's face darkened. A muscle in his jaw jumped. "Fired? Pierre fired you. For touching a guest. And he kept the tip, by the way." She wiped a raindrop, or a tear, from her cheek. "So, if you're here to ask for your money back, Pierre has it." Alexander looked at the bags, then at the shivering woman. He pulled his phone from his pocket and typed something rapidly. "Pierre will never work in this city again," he muttered. He took a step closer. The bodyguard moved the umbrella to cover Sarah. "I didn't come for the money," Alexander said. "I came because Leo hasn't stopped asking for the lady. He hasn't slept through the night since Tuesday. I have a board meeting in Tokyo in 2 days, and I am falling apart." It was a confession a man like him should never make to a woman on a curb. "I need you to come with me," he said. "Come with you." "Where?" "To the penthouse, to my home." Sarah took a step back. "I'm not that kind of girl, Mr. Sterling." "No," Alexander said, quickly, raising his hands. "God, no, I need a nanny, a caretaker, whatever you want to call it. I will pay you $10,000 a month, plus room and board, health insurance, everything." 10,000. Sarah felt the ground tilt. "Why me?" she asked. "You could hire a royal nanny." "I did," Alexander said grimly. "Leo bit her. He wants you. He remembers your humming. Please." The rain was getting heavier. She looked at her trash bags. She looked at the desperate eyes of the billionaire. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay?" "Yes." Alexander let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. He gestured to the car. "Get in. The driver will get your bags." As Sarah slid into the leather interior of the car, warmed by heated seats and smelling of that same musk and cedar cologne, she thought her luck had finally turned. She was wrong. Entering the Sterling penthouse wasn't entering a home. It was entering a war zone. and the enemy wasn't the toddler. As they stepped out of the private elevator into a foyer larger than her entire apartment building, a woman was waiting for them. She was tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed in a white suit. Her eyes were sharp as broken glass. "Alexander," the woman said, her voice dripping with ice. "Who is this stray?" Alexander stiffened. "Jessica, this is the new nanny, Sarah." Jessica, his personal assistant, and, as the tabloids rumored, his hopeful fiancée, looked Sarah up and down with pure venom. "A nanny?" Jessica scoffed. "She looks like she slept in a gutter. You cannot let her near Leo. She'll infect him." "She's hired, Jessica. That's final," Alexander said, though he sounded exhausted. "Show her to the guest wing." Jessica walked up to Sarah, stopping inches from her face. The scent of expensive perfume was overpowering. "Listen to me, you little rat," Jessica whispered, too low for Alexander to hear. "I don't know what game you're playing or how you tricked him, but I am going to be the mother of this house. You last 3 days, Max. I'll make sure of it." Sarah gripped her bag tighter. She looked past Jessica to the hallway, where a small, tear-stained face was peeking around the corner. "Leo." He saw Sarah. His face lit up. "Lady." He ran toward her on unsteady legs. Sarah dropped to her knees, ignoring Jessica, and opened her arms. Leo collided with her, burying his face in her neck. Alexander watched them, a strange softness in his eyes. Jessica watched them, her eyes narrowing into slits. The war had begun. "A nanny?" Jessica scoffed. "She looks like she slept in a gutter. You cannot let her near Leo. She'll infect him." "She's hired, Jessica. That's final," Alexander said, though he sounded exhausted. "Show her to the guest wing." Jessica walked up to Sarah, stopping inches from her face. The scent of expensive perfume was overpowering. "Listen to me, you little rat," Jessica whispered, too low for Alexander to hear. "I don't know what game you're playing or how you tricked him, but I am going to be the mother of this house. You last 3 days, Max. I'll make sure of it." Sarah gripped her bag tighter. She looked past Jessica to the hallway, where a small, tear-stained face was peeking around the corner. "Leo." He saw Sarah. His face lit up. "Lady!" He ran toward her on unsteady legs. Sarah dropped to her knees, ignoring Jessica, and opened her arms. Leo collided with her, burying his face in her neck. Alexander watched them, a strange softness in his eyes. Jessica watched them, her eyes narrowing into slits. The war had begun. 2 weeks into her stay at the Sterling penthouse, Sarah had worked a miracle. Leo wasn't just sleeping. He was laughing. The gloomy, silent hallways of the penthouse now echoed with the sound of running feet and giggles. Sarah had taught him to finger paint, to build forts out of the expensive silk cushions, and, most importantly, to trust again. Alexander had noticed. He came home earlier from the office now. He'd loosen his tie and stand in the doorway, watching Sarah read The Velveteen Rabbit to his son. The dark circles under his eyes were fading. For the first time in years, the Ice King of Wall Street looked human. But for every smile Alexander gave Sarah, Jessica's hatred grew darker. It was a Friday evening. Alexander was hosting a small, high-stakes dinner for 3 potential investors in the dining room. He had asked Sarah to bring Leo out for 5 minutes to say goodnight, wanting to show the investors that he was a family man, a stable man. "Make sure he looks perfect," Alexander had told Sarah, nervous tension in his voice. "These men are traditionalists." In the kitchen, Sarah was prepping a fruit cup for Leo. Jessica walked in. She was wearing a stunning crimson dress, looking every bit the lady of the house she desperately wanted to be. "You're trying too hard," Jessica said, leaning against the marble island. "He's a billionaire, Sarah. You're the help. Don't confuse the two." "I'm just doing my job, Jessica," Sarah replied, not looking up. "Here," Jessica said, sliding a plate of artisanal oatmeal cookies across the counter. "Leo loves these. The chef made them fresh. Give him one to keep him quiet during the introduction. We can't have him screaming in front of the Japanese delegation." Sarah hesitated. "I haven't checked the ingredients." "Oh, stop it," Jessica snapped. "It's oatmeal and raisins. I've been feeding him these since before you were digging through trash. Just take it." Sarah, feeling the pressure of the time, nodded. She put a cookie in Leo's hand as she carried him toward the dining room. The doors opened. Alexander stood up, smiling. "Gentlemen, this is my son, Leo." Leo waved, looking adorable in his little suit. He took a big bite of the cookie. The reaction was almost instant. Leo dropped the cookie. His hands flew to his throat. A wheezing sound, like a broken whistle, filled the room. His face turned a terrifying shade of blotchy red. "Leo!" Alexander rushed forward. Leo couldn't breathe. His lips were turning blue. "He's choking!" one of the investors shouted. "No," Sarah realized with horror, seeing the hives erupting on his neck. "It's an allergic reaction. Anaphylaxis." She dropped to her knees, ripping open his collar. "Alexander, does he have allergies?" "Walnuts!" Alexander screamed, panic seizing him. "He's deathly allergic to walnuts. Who gave him walnuts?" The room spun. Sarah looked at the cookie on the floor. It wasn't just oatmeal. "EpiPen! Now!" Sarah yelled, her command overriding the billionaire's panic. "Where is it?" "In the nursery, up the stairs." There wasn't time. Leo's eyes were rolling back. Sarah didn't run to the nursery. She grabbed her purse, which she kept by the kitchen door. She ripped it open. Because her own little sister, the one who used to cry, had also had severe allergies, Sarah always carried a pediatric EpiPen, a habit from a life she left behind. She uncapped the blue safety release. "Hold his leg," she ordered Alexander. He obeyed instantly. Sarah jammed the needle into Leo's thigh. The boy screamed, a beautiful, life-affirming scream. 10 seconds later, the wheezing eased. The color began to return to his cheeks. Alexander scooped his son up, clutching him to his chest, shaking violently. The investors were stunned into silence. Then, the silence was broken by the click of heels. Jessica walked in, her face a mask of shock. "Oh my God!" she cried. "What happened?" "I told her. I explicitly told Sarah not to give him the walnut cookies. I set them aside for the staff." Sarah froze. She looked up from the floor. "You handed them to me. You said he loved them." "How dare you?" Jessica gasped, turning to Alexander, tears welling in her eyes. "Alexander, I caught her eating them earlier. I warned her they were dangerous for Leo. She must have been careless. She almost killed him." Alexander stood up. His fear had turned to a cold, black rage. He looked at Sarah. "Is this true?" he growled. "Did you feed him the cookies from the red jar?" "There was no jar," Sarah pleaded, standing up, her hands shaking. "She gave it to me on a plate. She said the chef made them for him." "Liar!" Jessica sobbed. "I would never hurt Leo. I've been with this family for 5 years. She's been here 2 weeks." It was the billionaire's word against the waitress, the loyal assistant against the stray. Alexander looked at Sarah, his eyes hard as flint. "Get out!" "Alexander, please listen. Get out!" he roared, the sound shaking the walls. "Go to your room. Pack your bags. You leave in the morning. If you weren't the one who just saved his life with that pen, I'd have you arrested." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Jessica, who was hiding a smirk behind a perfectly manicured hand. Sarah turned and ran from the room, heartbreak burning in her chest. She had saved him, and it didn't matter. It was 2:00 a.m. The penthouse was dark. Sarah hadn't packed. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. She knew she had to leave, but the thought of leaving Leo with her, with Jessica, made her physically ill. Jessica wasn't just mean. She was dangerous. She had risked a child's life to win a power struggle. She couldn't sleep. Her throat was dry. She crept out into the hallway to get a glass of water from the kitchen, trying to be invisible. Passing the library, she heard a sound, the clink of glass on glass. The heavy oak door was ajar. Inside, only the fireplace provided light. Alexander was sitting in a leather wingback chair, a bottle of scotch half empty beside him. He was staring at a large portrait above the mantel. Sarah intended to keep walking, but Alexander spoke. He didn't turn around. "How much did she pay you?" Sarah stopped. "What?" "To come here, to hurt him." Alexander's voice was slurred, heavy with grief. "Did my competitors hire you? To show that I can't even keep my son safe?" Sarah walked into the room. Her fear was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective anger. "No one paid me, Alexander, and I didn't hurt him. Jessica gave me that cookie. She set me up." Alexander laughed, a bitter, dry sound. "Jessica loves this family. She was my wife's best friend. She's the only link Leo has left to his mother." "That doesn't make her a saint," Sarah said, stepping closer. "It makes her desperate to replace her." Alexander stood up suddenly, swaying. He grabbed the scotch glass and hurled it into the fireplace. It shattered, the alcohol causing the flames to flare up blue and orange. "You don't know anything," he shouted. "You don't know what it's like to see her face every time I look at him. Leo has her eyes. He has Eleanor's eyes." He collapsed back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "I killed her, Sarah. I was driving. It was raining, just like the night I found you. I lost control of the car. She died instantly. I didn't even get a scratch." The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. This was the wound that wouldn't heal, the guilt that was eating him alive. Sarah moved instinctively. She knelt beside his chair. She didn't touch him, not yet. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered. "It was," he sobbed. A man who commanded fleets of ships and thousands of employees was weeping like a child. And now I'm failing Leo. He deserves a mother, and all he has is a father who can't look at him without falling apart. "He doesn't need a perfect father," Sarah said, reaching out and placing her hand over his, which was clenched on the armrest. "He just needs you. He needs you to be present. The past is gone, Alexander. But Leo is here, and he's wonderful." Alexander turned his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, searching hers. In the firelight, Sarah looked ethereal, her hair loose around her shoulders. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. The contact sent a jolt through both of them. "You saved him tonight," Alexander whispered, his voice sober now. "I saw how fast you moved. You had that EpiPen ready." "Why?" "My sister," Sarah said softly. "I couldn't save her, but I swore I'd never be helpless again." Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, stripping away the title of Waitress or Nanny. He saw a woman of immense strength. "I don't want you to leave," he said. "You fired me. I was angry. I was scared." He leaned closer, the scent of whiskey and cedar filling the space between them. "Stay, please. Watch over him. Watch over me." The air crackled with tension. His face was inches from hers. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Suddenly the library lights blazed on. They sprang apart. Jessica stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing sleeping clothes. She was fully dressed, holding a smartphone, the camera lens pointed directly at them. "Well, well," Jessica said, her voice trembling with a manic sort of glee. seducing the grieving widower while his son recovers from your negligence. The tabloids are going to pay a fortune for this photo." Alexander stood up, shielding Sarah. "Delete that, Jessica. Get out!" "No!" Jessica screamed, her mask finally slipping completely. "I have waited 3 years. I comforted you. I managed your life. I raised your brat, and you pick this. Nobody?" She lowered the phone, her eyes cold. "I'm calling the police, Alexander. But not for this." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a glittering object. It was Eleanor's diamond engagement ring, a family heirloom worth $500,000 that had been locked in the safe. "I just found this in Sarah's bag." Jessica smiled. "A cruel, twisted thing. Grand larceny. That's 10 to 20 years in prison, I believe." "You planted it!" Sarah cried. "Who will the police believe?" Jessica hissed. "The trusted executive assistant, or the desperate waitress who was fired for misconduct and found on the street?" She held the phone to her ear. 911. "Yes. I need to report a robbery at the Sterling penthouse. The thief is still on the premises." Alexander looked at Jessica with horror, finally seeing the monster she had become. But the police were already on their way, and the evidence was in Sarah's bag. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers strobed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, turning the luxury apartment into a disorienting nightmare. 2 officers were in the library. One was holding the velvet bag containing Elena's engagement ring, which they had just pulled from the bottom of Sarah's worn-out backpack. "I didn't take it," Sarah said, her voice trembling but clear. "She put it there. Please, you have to believe me." Officer Miller, a tired-looking man who had seen too many domestic disputes, shook his head. "Ma'am, we found the item in your possession. The owner claims it was stolen. You have the right to remain silent." "She is a thief and a danger to this family," Jessica shouted, playing the role of the protective guardian to perfection. She stood behind the police, her arms crossed, a look of righteous indignation on her face. "She tried to poison Mr. Sterling's son earlier this evening, and now she's robbing us blind. Get her out of here before she hurts someone else." Alexander stood by the fireplace. He was unnaturally still. He hadn't said a word since the police arrived. He watched the officers pull Sarah's hands behind her back. He heard the metallic click-click of the handcuffs. Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide and wet with tears. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She just looked at him with a profound disappointment. She thought he believed the lie. "Alexander," she whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't move to stop them. "Let's go," Officer Miller said, guiding Sarah toward the elevator. As they dragged her out into the hallway, a heart-wrenching sound echoed through the penthouse. "Lady! Lady!" Leo had woken up. He was standing at the top of the stairs, clutching his blanket, his little face contorted in terror as he watched the police take his safety away. "It's okay, Leo," Jessica cooed, rushing toward the stairs. "Jessica is here. The bad woman is going away." "No!" Leo screamed, stomping his foot. "No, Jessica! Lady!" The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off Sarah's view of the sobbing child and the stone-faced billionaire. The ride down to the precinct was a blur of humiliation. Sarah was booked, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and despair. She sat on the hard metal bench, the events of the last few weeks playing in her head. The soup, the lullaby, the rain, the kiss in the library. It had all been a trap. Jessica had won. Sarah was going to prison. She buried her face in her hands and wept. Not for herself, but for the little boy left behind in that cold, golden cage. Back at the penthouse, the silence was deafening. Jessica finally managed to get a hysterical Leo back to sleep. though he sobbed in his dreams. She walked back down to the living room, pouring herself a large glass of Alexander's most expensive cognac. She found Alexander sitting in the dark, staring at the blank television screen. "It's finally over," Jessica sighed, taking a sip and sitting on the sofa opposite him. "I know it's hard, Alexander. You wanted to believe she was good. But these people, they are predators." She saw a grieving widower and a rich target. "That's all." Alexander didn't look at her. "You called the police very quickly, Jessica." "I had to protect you," she said smoothly. "I knew as soon as I saw the ring. I've been suspicious of her since day one." "And the walnuts?" Alexander asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "You really think she just made a mistake?" "She's uneducated, Alexander. She probably didn't even know what a walnut looked like in the dough. It was incompetence, criminal negligence." Jessica stood up and walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But don't worry. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We can go back to how it was. Just you, me, and Leo. We can be a family." Alexander slowly reached up and removed her hand from his shoulder, as if it were a poisonous spider. He stood up and walked to the wall panel that controlled the penthouse's smart systems. "You know, Jessica," he said, "after Elena died, I became paranoid. I was obsessed with security. I didn't just install cameras in the hallways and the entrances." Jessica frowned, a flicker of unease in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "I installed 4K cameras with high-fidelity audio in every single room, even the kitchen, even the library. And specifically," he turned to look at her, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying intelligence, "hidden pinhole cameras in the pantry." Jessica's glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the rug with a dull thud, spilling cognac everywhere. "I didn't say anything to the police," Alexander continued, his voice rising, "because I wanted to see how far you would go. I wanted to see if you would actually let an innocent woman, the woman who saved my son's life, be dragged away in handcuffs." "Alexander, wait!" "Computer," Alexander commanded. "Display footage from camera 4B and camera 2A. Timestamp, 6:30 p.m. today." The massive 80-inch screen on the wall flickered to life. The footage was crystal clear. It showed the kitchen. Jessica was standing at the counter. She looked over her shoulder to ensure she was alone. Then she opened the pantry. She took out a bag of walnuts. She placed them in a mortar and pestle and ground them into a fine dust. On the screen, Jessica smiled, a cruel, wicked smile, as she sprinkled the deadly powder over the oatmeal cookies. Then the footage switched. The library. 1:55 a.m. Jessica creeping in while Sarah and Alexander were talking. She reached into Sarah's open bag by the door and dropped the diamond ring inside. The silence in the room was absolute. Jessica was trembling. Her face was grey. "Alexander, I did it for us. She was taking you away. She didn't belong here." Alexander turned to her. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was disgust, pure, unadulterated loathing. "You tried to kill my son," he whispered. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "To get to me, you poisoned a 2-year-old boy. You are not a woman. You are a monster." He pulled his phone out. "I already sent the footage to the precinct captain and to my legal team." The elevator chimed. Jessica spun around. The doors opened. It wasn't Sarah. It was the police again. Officer Miller was back, and this time he wasn't looking tired. He looked furious. "Jessica Vance?" Officer Miller barked. Jessica backed away, stumbling over the coffee table. No, you don't understand. He manipulated the footage. He's crazy." "Save it for the judge," Miller said. He grabbed her wrists, twisting them behind her back, with significantly less gentleness than he had used with Sarah. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, filing a false police report, and planting evidence. You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it." "Alexander!" Jessica shrieked as they dragged her toward the elevator. "I love you. I did everything for you. Don't let them take me." Alexander didn't even blink. He watched the doors close on the woman who had made his life a living hell. Then he grabbed his coat. He had to go get Sarah. The holding cell at the 19th precinct didn't just smell of bleach, it smelled of despair. It was a cold, sterile scent that settled deep in Sarah's lungs, making every breath feel like a labor. She sat on the edge of the metal bench, her knees pulled up to her chest, shivering despite the heavy wool blanket an older female officer had tossed her way hours ago. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with an incessant, headache-inducing hum, casting long, harsh shadows against the cinder-block walls. Time had lost its meaning. Had it been hours? A day? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to block out the sounds of the precinct, the shouting of a drunk man in the next cell, the clanging of iron doors, the crackle of police radios. But closing her eyes only made the images in her mind more vivid. She saw Leo's face, the way his little nose crinkled when he laughed, the way he had screamed, "Lady!" As the elevator doors closed, a sound that had ripped her heart cleanly in two. She saw Alexander's face, too. The Ice King. He had lived up to his nickname. He had stood there, impassive and statuesque, watching the woman who had saved his son's life be dragged away like a common criminal. That betrayal hurt worse than the handcuffs. She had allowed herself to believe, just for a moment in that firelit library, that she was seen. That she wasn't just Sarah the waitress, or Sarah the homeless girl, but Sarah. "Fool," she whispered to herself, her voice raspy. "You were just a temporary fix, a bandage on a bullet wound." She imagined the trial. Jessica Vance, with her high-priced lawyers and her perfectly coiffed hair, spinning a web of lies that a public defender wouldn't have the resources to untangle. Sarah saw her future stretching out before her, a prison sentence, a permanent record, the final nail in the coffin of a life that had already been so hard. "Miller!" The shout made her jump. The heavy steel door at the end of the corridor slid open with a grinding screech. A guard, a large man with a thick mustache and tired eyes, stepped into the hallway. He held a clipboard. "Sarah Miller, front and center." Sarah stood up, her legs numb. She smoothed down her wrinkled clothes, the same clothes she had worn to the dinner party that ended in disaster. She walked to the bars, her hands trembling. "Is it time for my arraignment?" she asked, her voice small. The guard unlocked the cell door. "No, you're being released." Sarah blinked, sure she had misheard. "Released? But the bail. I don't have money for bail." "No bail," the guard grunted, handing her a plastic bag containing her shoelaces and the few dollars she had in her pocket. Charges were dropped, all of them. The district attorney declined to prosecute due to new evidence. "New evidence?" Sarah repeated, dazed. "Don't ask me, lady. I just turned the keys. Someone is waiting for you in the lobby. Sign here." She scribbled her signature on the release form, her hand shaking so badly the letters looked like a seismograph reading. She walked down the long, linoleum-tiled corridor, passing the booking desk where officers gave her curious glances. She pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped into the precinct lobby. It was chaotic, filled with people shouting in different languages, lawyers in cheap suits, and crying family members. But the moment Sarah stepped in, the chaos seemed to recede into the background, because he was there. Alexander Sterling was standing near the exit. He looked nothing like the billionaire tycoon who graced the covers of business magazines. His charcoal suit jacket was gone, his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar and stained with what looked like coffee. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was wild, as if he had been running his hands through it for hours. He was pacing back and forth, vibrating with nervous energy. When the doors opened and he saw her, he stopped dead. The air between them crackled with a tension so thick it felt physical. "Sarah," he breathed. The name came out like a prayer. Sarah didn't move toward him. She hugged her thin coat tighter around her body, using it as a shield. "You're here," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Why?" "To make sure I leave town." Alexander flinched as if she had struck him. He took a step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "No, God, no. Sarah, I am so sorry." "You stood there," Sarah said, the tears finally spilling over, hot and fast. "You stood there and watched them handcuff me. You listened to her lies, and you didn't say a word. Do you know what that felt like? Do you have any idea?" "I know," Alexander said, his voice cracking. "It killed me. Every second of it tore me apart. But I had to." "You had to?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "You're Alexander Sterling. You could have stopped it with a snap of your fingers." "If I had stopped it then," Alexander said, his intensity rising as he stepped closer, ignoring the stares of the people in the lobby, "Jessica would have known. She would have known I was on to her, and she would have destroyed the evidence." Sarah wiped her eyes aggressively. "What evidence?" Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen and held it up to her. It was a video. High-definition security footage. Sarah watched in stunned silence as the screen showed Jessica in the kitchen, grinding walnuts into a fine powder with a look of pure malice on her face. Then, the video switched to the library, showing Jessica creeping in to plant the ring in Sarah's bag. "I have cameras everywhere," Alexander explained, his voice low and urgent. "But the system uploads to a secure cloud server every hour. When the police arrived, the upload hadn't finished. If I had accused Jessica right there, she could have remotely wiped the local hard drive from her phone before I could stop her. She had admin access. She would have erased the proof, and it would have been your word against hers forever." He lowered the phone, looking into Sarah's eyes with a desperation she had never seen in a man before. "I had to let the trap snap shut. I had to let her think she had won, just for an hour, so the upload would complete and I could send it to the captain. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Sarah, watching you walk into that elevator, it felt like I was losing Eleanor all over again." The mention of his late wife made the air shift. The raw honesty in his voice chipped away at Sarah's wall of defense. "Where is she?" Sarah asked quietly. "Jessica." "Cell 4B, Alexander said with a grim satisfaction. "I showed the footage to the captain myself. She's been charged with attempted murder, filing a false police report, and grand larceny. She will never hurt anyone ever again. I promise you that." Sarah let out a long, shuddering breath. The nightmare was truly over. But the hurt, the feeling of being disposable, lingered. "You took a big risk with my life, Alexander," she whispered. "I know," he admitted. "And I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you let me." He reached into his back pocket. Sarah tensed, half expecting a checkbook. "A severance package. Here's $1 million for your trouble. Now please go away." But Alexander didn't pull out a check. He pulled out a piece of paper. It was wrinkled, torn at the corner, and covered in colorful wax markings. It was a crayon drawing. "Leo wouldn't go to sleep," Alexander said, his eyes misting over. He screamed for hours. He kept asking for the lady. He drew this while I was on the phone with the lawyers. He handed the paper to Sarah. It was a crude drawing, the kind only a toddler can make. It showed a tall stick figure with black hair, a smaller stick figure, and a woman with long brown hair and a bright green dress. Above them, a yellow sun smiled down, but it was what Leo had scribbled at the bottom in jagged, uneven letters that stopped Sarah's heart. The pack. He told me that wolves live in packs, Alexander said softly. He said you're part of the pack now, and you don't leave the pack behind. Sarah looked at the drawing, her vision blurring. She traced the little stick figure of the woman. He chose you, Sarah, Alexander continued. He chose you before I even knew what was happening. But tonight, I chose you too. Not because you're a nanny, not because I need help, but because you are the bravest, most incredible woman I have ever met. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them. He reached out and gently took her cold hands in his. I don't want you to work for me anymore, he said. Sarah looked up, a fresh wave of pain hitting her. So, I really am fired? No. Alexander shook his head, a small, tentative smile touching his lips. I'm saying I don't want to be your boss. I want to be something else. I want to be the man who takes you out to dinner. Real dinner. Not at Le Ciel, but somewhere with paper napkins and greasy food. I want to be the man who earns your trust back. Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the fatigue etched into his face, the fear of rejection in his eyes. He wasn't the billionaire anymore. He was just a father trying to put his broken family back together. Grilled cheese, Sarah whispered. Alexander blinked. Excuse me? A small smile broke through Sarah's tears. I want a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup from a diner. Not a 5-star restaurant. Alexander let out a laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief that echoed through the lobby. He squeezed her hands. I can do that. I can definitely do that, even if I have to buy the diner. Don't buy the diner, Sarah scolded gently. Just buy the sandwich. Deal. Alexander wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her into his side. It wasn't a possessive gesture. It was a protective one. For the first time in her life, Sarah didn't feel like she was fighting the world alone. She leaned her head against his shoulder, exhausted, but at peace. Together they walked out of the precinct and into the cool morning air of New York City, leaving the darkness behind them. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of diamonds, velvet, and camera flashes. It was the social event of the season, the annual Sterling Charity Gala. Hundreds of New York's elite were gathered, sipping champagne and whispering behind their hands. The topic of conversation wasn't the stock market or the latest merger. It was the woman standing on the stage. Alexander Sterling stood at the podium, looking more handsome than ever in a bespoke tuxedo. But the harsh lines of stress that had defined his face for years were gone, smoothed away by happiness. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander's voice boomed through the speakers. For years, this foundation has been just a tax write-off, a name on a check. But recently, I learned that true charity isn't about writing checks. It's about showing up. It's about listening to the cries that everyone else ignores. He turned to the side of the stage, his eyes softening. I would like to introduce the new executive director of the Sterling Children's Initiative, a woman who taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who stays when the storm hits. My partner in life and in love, Sarah Miller. The spotlight swung to the wings. Sarah stepped out. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She wasn't wearing hand-me-downs. She was wearing a floor-length gown of emerald silk that shimmered under the lights, matching the green of her eyes. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, but a few loose strands framed her face, keeping her softness intact. The room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite applause, it was thunderous. Sarah walked to the podium, her heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't tremble. She looked out at the faces in the crowd, some of the same people who had sat at Le Ciel that fateful night, ignoring a crying child. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and strong. 6 months ago, I was sleeping on a curb. I thought my life was over. But I found out that rock bottom is just the solid foundation you need to build something new. She looked down at the front row. There, sitting in a miniature tuxedo, was Leo. He was bouncing in his seat, grinning wildly. Next to him sat a new nanny, an older, kindly woman who Sarah had personally vetted, but Leo only had eyes for the stage. "Mommy!" Leo shouted, his voice cutting through the applause. "That's my mommy!" Laughter and oars rippled through the crowd. Sarah's eyes filled with happy tears. She looked at Alexander, who was beaming with pride. She didn't need a contract. She didn't need the money. She had the pack. Alexander stepped back to the microphone, wrapping his arm around Sarah's waist. He didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about the board members. He pulled her close, dipping her slightly, and kissed her, a deep, passionate kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks. Far away, in a cold, grey cell at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, Jessica Vance sat on a hard cot. She held a crumpled newspaper she had found in the recreation room. On the front page was the picture of Alexander and Sarah kissing, with the headline, "The Billionaires Happily Ever After." Jessica stared at the image, at the joy she had tried so hard to poison. She crumpled the paper into a ball and threw it at the wall. It bounced back and landed at her feet, silent and pathetic. Back at the plaza, the music swelled. Alexander whispered in Sarah's ear. "Ready to go?" "The gala isn't over," Sarah whispered back, smiling. "I know." Alexander grinned, looking at his son who was now rushing the stage to hug their legs. "But I promised Leo a grilled cheese sandwich, and I never break a promise to my family." Sarah laughed, picking up Leo as Alexander took her hand. They walked off the stage together, out of the spotlight and into their life. A real life. Messy and beautiful and full of love. What an incredible journey. Sarah went from a fired waitress shivering in the rain to the heart of a billionaire's family, proving that true nobility comes from kindness, not a bank account. Jessica thought she could scheme her way to the top, but she learned the hard way that when you dig a grave for someone else, you usually fall in it yourself. Karma served her a cold dish of justice, while Sarah and Alexander found the warmth they both desperately needed. It turns out the waitress was right all along. The little boy just needed a mum, and the billionaire just needed a reason to love again. If this story warmed your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And tell us in the comments, do you think Alexander should have told Sarah about the trap earlier? Or did he do the right thing by waiting to catch Jessica red-handed? I read every comment. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more powerful stories of love, betrayal, and redemption. Thanks for watching.